He is here to share his side of this story. Good evening, Senator.
Good evening, Liz.
So please tell us from your point of view what it was that happened here. Your campaign has put out a very strong statement saying that it was outrageous to call this a hit and run, and you say it was a misunderstanding and you didn't even realize that the car that you were riding in had hit another car.
Yeah, that's right. I left the studio, and a young staffer of mine picked me up and was pulled out of a parking place. There were 3 of us in the car. No one thought there'd been any damage done or anything. We drove around. It was only later I noticed that there was a small dent on my car, and I spoke to the owner of the vehicle. We've exchanged insurance information. I take full responsibility for it. It was my staff member. It was my car. But obviously, if we had thought that there had been an accident and that we had bumped the other car, we would have stopped. It's something that look, I've talked it over with the owner of the other vehicle, and I know how lousy it feels to have your car hit. That's happened to me. I'm sorry about what happened, and I've agreed to take care of it, and we've actually talked several times today and worked it out. So it was not, what I objected to was characterizing Rachel's driving as sort of a hit and run, suggesting she was careening down the street and hit somebody. She was pulling out of a parking place, shouldn't have hit in any way, shape, or form, however hard or soft, any other vehicle. So we didn't realize there was anything that had happened. There were 3 of us, and none of us realized it.
Senator, how is it that you were in the car? Were you speaking to one another? Was the radio on? Were you in a rush to leave? Because usually, even if you're not going very quickly and you do hit a car, you feel some impact, and there's usually a sound. And the gentleman who was interviewed by Grace, who had seen this, said he heard something. So there must have been some reason why you hadn't heard anything that's connected to this impact.
Well, I guess so. I mean, look, I can't comment on what he had to say. Yeah, I mean, the windows were up, the air conditioning was on, people are talking on their phones. It's no excuse. I apologize to Melissa, whose car it was, and taken responsibility for it. It's my staff member, and I don't know what else to say. We've discussed it, and we worked it out. So that's that. I realize that my status makes it a little more exciting, and that the family relations of the driver makes it a little more exciting.
Senator, I'm not sure necessarily that your status makes it exciting. I think that your status raises into question. I mean, you're seeking to be the top lawyer of the state of New York, and generally speaking, to leave a scene of an accident is not legal. And some people would say that it calls into question your judgment. In fact, actually, as Grace mentioned, there's this statement that Kathleen Rice's campaign put out saying she's going to reserve judgment on the incident, but she called them, quote, clearly very disturbing allegations. I mean, that raises questions about this incident and potentially could be used against you in a political way.
Well, actually, I think Kathleen's statement is right on the mark. The allegations are disturbing. The fact of the matter is, obviously, if any of us had thought that, there was an accident, we would have stopped. I mean, you do that so you can submit things to your own insurance company. We didn't know, and it wasn't until much later that anyone noticed that there was a dent on the very back of my car. So I apologize. No excuse for doing any damage to anyone's vehicle. We didn't know. Rachel's sorry. I'm sorry. I've agreed to cover all the costs of the repairs. I've worked it out with Melissa, and all I can say is that I'm sorry. But obviously, if we had thought that there was an accident, we would have stopped.
There was a press conference today, actually, at which all of the Democratic Attorney General contenders were supposed to be there. You were not there. We'll get into the issue that was addressed there, because it's quite an interesting one. Was this the reason why you had not shown up at that event?
Oh, no. By the time that event had taken place, I'd already spoken to Melissa, and we'd already, agreed to exchange insurance information. The whole thing had pretty much been resolved. So, no, I was stuck. I just couldn't get down there in time. And the issue of the stop and frisk bill, I've been actively involved with for a long time. It was the first time my opponents stepped up, and I'm very pleased that they're supporting our effort to get Governor Patterson to sign the bill. But I spoke at a big rally on it on Saturday. It came through my committee in the Senate. I just couldn't get down to this particular event at that particular time.
This actually, what we're talking about is legislation that would prevent the NYPD, the New York Police Department, from continuing to enter information that they glean through these stop and frisk, these controversial practices, into a database that they then access later when they are trying to solve other crimes. There is a lot of controversy about this. You and your fellow Attorney General candidates are asking the governor to sign the bill. New York Police Department Commissioner Ray Kelly says, no, this should not be signed. It's actually damaging for police work, and I believe he's being backed up by Mayor Bloomberg. Why, though, has this, I mean, stop and frisk, I'm sure happens all over the state. Why is this such a targeted bill for New York City?
Well, stop and frisk happens all over the country, but there's no place in the United States, and this has been documented both in the popular press. There was a big feature in the New York Times about it this last week, and by academics. There's no place in the country that has this volume of stop and frisk activity concentrated in specific communities. And in New York City, for better or worse, and some of us think for worse, they concentrate very heavily in poor communities of color. And when then your name gets into the database when you are found to have committed no crime. So we're talking about police practices where, you know, well over 80% of the people are released without ever being issued a summons. They didn't do anything wrong. They're just going into the building they live in or something like that. But their names are maintained in a database. And this has an insidious effect over time. And this is, as you know, Liz, criminal justice policy is something that I do a lot of work on. I chair the Codes Committee. I've worked in the criminal justice system for decades. When you have a database, and those are the people you look to first, you tend to over-investigate and over-prosecute that pool and ignore other people.
But the
So if you're someone who happens to walk around in, you know, a middle-class white community, you may be a stone-cold criminal, but you are not on the list of people who the police will look at first. What is the most famous line in Western law enforcement, Liz? Round up the usual suspects.
Okay, hold on.
In New York City, you have a list of usual suspects that is overwhelmingly concentrated on poor people of color, and yet we know that of those people stopped, white people are more likely, I think by a factor of 2,
to have
committed
process.
crimes.
This isn't about the practice specifically. You're not saying stop the practice of stop and frisk. It sounds like, why not just say stop that entirely, because it sounds like you actually are quite opposed to it, instead of simply, okay, you can continue to stop and frisk, but just don't use the information that you glean to then subsequently try and solve other crimes.
No, I disagree. Our position is, and look, stop and frisk is a very important tactic. When it's used properly, it's a part of the law enforcement community's work all over America. But there is no excuse for maintaining a database of people who have committed no crime. I mean, I'm not saying you can't use it for crime solving. Anyone who is stopped and has a weapon on them, has contraband on them, has committed any sort of criminal activity, fine. They go into the database. The problem here is we're entering hundreds of thousands of people a year who have committed no crime into a database to make them the usual suspects. And that means you over-investigate them. But the worst thing, Liz, is that means you're under-investigating other folks. So you may be a recidivist, stone-cold criminal, but because you dress like a middle-class white guy, you're not going to get in the database. That's the thing we're concerned about.
Has the governor indicated to you yet which way he's going to go?
I know, but I'm hopeful that he's going to sign the bill. I mean, he and I have worked on criminal justice issues together for a long time, and I think he does understand the nature of the problem. Look, this is something that is not anti-police. We have police officers from all over the state contacting me, contacting Senator Eric Adams, who is the bill's sponsor in the Senate, Hakeem Jeffries in the Assembly. Everyone is concerned about the abuse of the database. We want to work with them. There were negotiations to try and fix this before the bill passed, and you know, for whatever reason, those didn't work out. So I think this is a way to adjust the system, to be smarter on crime, and also to remove this very strong sense in a lot of communities in New York that we do not have equal justice under law, that people are targeted by race. And you saw the piece in the New York Times, the number of stops and frisks in these particular very small communities with housing projects and other places that the police go to again and again and again. It distorts the basic data that the police use to solve crimes. That's, from a criminological point of view, that to me is the worst problem here.
Well, we'll see what happens with this bill. I want to thank you for talking about it, but also for coming on and to tell your side of the story regarding the accident that happened last night. Senator Eric Schneiderman, thanks very much for joining us.